Thanks for our speakers coming in tonight to help us articulate the situation and what we can do about it. Um, Hamilton is become known as a very active community. It has a reputation now across the province as a city that has stood up to the threat of continued expansion of urban area, continued consumption of agricultural lands, natural features, wetlands, forests, and so on. And that battle, of course, is that achievement has not gone unnoticed at Queen's Park. So we continue to have to come back and fight it again. Historically, if we go back a little bit, we started an effort to limit the boundary in particularly in 2021 at a time when the city was considering a fairly large expansion onto rural lands and wasn't even contemplating a possibility that we would say no to any growth at all. But there was a movement across the city, very active, something in the neighborhood of 1,500, 2,000 lawn signs, and a decision by city council, appropriate decision to say, okay, let's have a mail-in survey. Let's actually try to figure out where the population is at. What do people think? So that was launched, and surprisingly to, I think, many people, it got an enormous response. About 18,000 people responded to that survey, and over 90% said no urban boundary expansion, freeze the boundary, no loss of farmland, no loss of wetlands and forests, and so on. City Council wasn't of that view when that survey was launched, but in the wake of that survey, that City Council, it's not the current one, it's an earlier one, voted 13-3 in November of 2021 to freeze the urban boundary, to say we're going to grow, but we're going to grow and we're going to accommodate the growth that the province is pushing on us within our existing urban area by intensification, by a string of methods, which I'm sure we'll get some discussion about tonight. And that got us to a position of what we thought was a victory, but that had to be incorporated into our official plan. It was. It went to the province, and lo and behold, the premier of the province in November of 2022, after we had actually elected a new city council, announced that he was going to force an expansion of the urban boundary, even larger than what had been talked about within the planning department at the city. And he did that the same day that he decided that he could carve up the greenbelt. So he got a bit of a backlash from that. There was a lot of anger about that across the province, particularly in Hamilton, but elsewhere as well. And after a few months of effort on that and the exposure of some pretty scandalous things going on in the premier's office and in the Conservative government's operations, by the Integrity Commissioner, by the Auditor General, he retreated on both of those. And we got back to a position of our urban boundary is what we set it out to be within our official plan. But the story wasn't over. And that's why we're here tonight. The Conservative government in Ontario has changed the planning rules. It's used to be a situation where if you wanted to expand the urban boundary, the municipal council was the lead organization for that. It decided whether it wanted to expand, and it had to justify that to the province. It had to show that there was an actual need to eat up more farmland and more natural features and so on. Mr. Ford has changed the rules so that now any private owner can initiate their own urban boundary expansion. And it doesn't even have to be attached to the current urban boundary. It can be basically anywhere in the lands outside the green belt and outside existing urban areas. So the pressure that had existed before and was being responded to by city staff and got reversed by city council, and the overwhelming public response is now back on the table. And we have a number of applications that have been filed with the city wanting to expand the urban boundary. So two of those are coming before, I believe two of them, and Councillor Kresh is with us tonight to detail this, but two of them are before the council next week, the 25th of June. And we are asking people again to fight this battle once more. It seems like we used to say when we were fighting expressways, you had to put a stake in them 3 times. It may well be that we have to do 3 times here to get our farmlands protected and our natural features protected. So that's the background to this. And it's great to have Phil Pothen here from Environmental Defense, who played a lead role in the fight to freeze the urban boundary, stop the expansion onto farmland, and is continuing to do that. And in the meantime, talking around at Bill 5 as well. We've got lots of fires to put out, but great to have all of you here tonight, and I hope that helps to set the stage.
Thanks, Don. I think you've run me out of my introduction for Phil Pothen here. You've done a great job of setting the stage for him to come in. And when we talk with Cameron, I'll pull up the picture here so we can see which parcels of land we're talking about. But first, just again, following that story that Don told of how we got here and now where we go from here, Phil, would you like to start sharing your deck?
Sure. Hold on a sec. Here we go. So, as you'll recall, we went through a bit of this beforehand. We had an earlier meeting along these lines soon after Bill 185 was passed, which sort of outlines how we got to the place where we are now. So it's important, I think, to just have a little refresher of, where we stand in order to understand the kind of points that are relevant. So I think Don has walked us through a fair amount of this stuff. This is, Hamilton has already defeated these settlement boundary expansions twice. First of all, at council itself. Second of all, by forcing the provincial government to reverse its direct imposition of these settlement boundary expansions. And this is the third attempt by the sprawl industry and the government that it owns to reinstate these same settlement area boundary expansions. And that is by repealing the original provincial policy statement and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And by allowing the applicants, the proponents in these cases, to apply as often as they like to try one off to get these settlement boundary expansions approved in isolation, without reference to the overall strategy of the city, by not having it done through a municipal comprehensive review anymore, and by moving the goalposts so that there isn't really a requirement to positively demonstrate the need for settlement boundary expansion in order to meet housing need. So this is the first item. I think many of you will have been at that earlier webinar, but originally they tried to do this by tweaking the rules, by lowering the density of new greenfield development, by reducing the requirement for infill development, etc. And so Hamilton voluntarily, the way that Hamilton avoided settlement boundary expansion was by voluntarily choosing to accommodate a much higher share of its population growth through the densification of existing neighborhoods than was required by the municipality, by the provincial government. So they won by accepting that there would be big radical changes to what are currently low-rise residential neighborhoods. They publicly, democratically made that choice. And as you'll recall, that's what the speakers were saying. We want to change our neighborhoods. We want apartments in these existing residential streets that are currently restricted for housing. They made that choice. That's the mandate that council has. Um, it was overridden by the minister. The minister tried to impose these changes. At the time, we said that that would result in slower housing output, not faster housing output, for various reasons that I will get into, but basically because there was a shortage of construction capacity. So that every greenfield, low density home that you build that requires new infrastructure to be built from scratch and that uses the most inefficient construction approach, or one of them, which is a single detached or semi-detached greenfield house, uh, it's actually drawing construction capacity away from forms of development that would deliver more homes faster. And so we were fairly successful for the same reasons we were successful in winning the Greenbelt fight, not in convincing people to sacrifice housing for the environment, not because they decided they care more about farmland than housing, but because they said there is, in fact, no conflict between preserving farmland and building more housing. And in fact, by choosing to eat up more farmland will be resulting in less housing. So here's the issue. All the goalposts have changed. There is now no recognition of a ban on unnecessary boundary expansions. So we cannot just say that settlement boundary expansion isn't necessary in order to meet housing need. There is no more assessment of all the separate boundary expansion requests in concert to see which is the best among them or to see how they interact with the city's other planning goals. It's not mandated, it's not part of an MCR process. Uh, and there's no more mandatory percentage of intensification. The good news here is that Hamilton has voluntarily accepted that higher densification rate, and that is really the linchpin here, as I will say. And also, they've gotten rid of the density minimums. And so, one of the consequences of this is that actually we can count even less than we could before on this greenfield development delivering a significant amount of housing because there is no floor anymore to how little housing they can build on that land if they want to use it, and they just wanted to get it built. And there are various reasons economically now that we can expect that large scale housing development will be inviable, and if they want to use up that land quickly, they may end up using it for things like estate residential, as an example. All right, so here's how we get to a win under this new legal framework. So first of all, the decision must still have regard to matters of provincial interest, and you will see, a lot of these points are referred to in the staff report regarding these particular settlement boundary expansions that are coming up next week. It must be consistent with this new document, not the provincial policy statement, but the planning statement, which, while very different, does still have some principles that we can hang our hats on. But thirdly, uh, you know, we can win based on the terms which the government has believed, are guaranteed to produce a positive outcome for sprawl developers. In particular, uh, you know, we can win on, well, will this actually produce more housing than the alternative? So the key strategy here is to show that settlement boundary expansions would likely mean fewer homes slower. Now, the main obstacle that we have here, so every settlement boundary expansion home would come at the expense of a larger number of homes within the same demand category, and that's very important. I think when you hear the West End home builders delegates, they are going to try to argue that infill development is not meeting the same category of demand as greenfield development would meet. And they will point to the fact that the types of apartments that are generally getting built are smaller. They're not a family sized. We know now that one of the delegates will be the economist Mike Moffat, who's basically very well respected. It's very hard to be on the wrong side of an issue as against Mike Moffat, but Mike is going to say, uh, you know, it only counts if these are 3 bedroom plus units, and so we need to laser focus on 3 bedroom plus units. And the only way he will not say this expressly, but he will say the precedent is that there are very few 3 bedroom plus units right now under the current rules built in any format that isn't low rise. And so they end up doing this sleight of hand where Mike doesn't actually come out and say it has to be low rise, but that the home builders representatives kind of close that gap. And so the good news here is I've talked at length with Mike Moffat, so I have picked apart his argument very, very clearly. I've spoken to him, I've gotten his admissions on what he would accept. And Mike has been very clear that it is not, in fact, low rise housing that matters, that he has just been using low-rise housing in his documents, in his submissions, as a shorthand for 3+ bedroom apartments because statistically there have been a negligible number of 3+ bedroom apartments that are not in a low-rise format. So he's basically, that's the statistic that he could find because 3+ bedroom units is not something that's categorized or is easily accessible. And he's been very express that instead of doing greenfield sprawl, even he admits, if instead of doing greenfield sprawl, it works just as well to legalize mid-rise, family-sized apartments on what are currently low-rise, family-friendly residential streets. And so he's identified this argument. He calls it, I believe, the impossible trinity of housing, where you can do you cannot achieve these three things at once. You cannot continue to grow and continue to control sprawl and continue to maintain the character of existing neighborhoods as fundamentally low rise. So by his admission, like even by his accounting, it's an option. Like, you get to choose which of the three are possible. And so what Hamilton has done, we want to say, is Hamilton has chosen to sacrifice number three, that we are not going to preserve the character of currently low-rise neighborhoods. We are actually actively choosing to change them, and that we are pursuing mid-rise on existing residential streets. And so this is the narrative that needs to be supported by every one of you when you speak to council. You need to request it, and you need to say, what are you talking? Yeah, we know all about this, this impossible trinity of housing. And, we have picked option three. We do not want to preserve the character of existing neighborhoods. And Hamilton has chosen to do that. That's what the settlement boundary expansion decision was. The decision to reject settlement boundary expansion wasn't just a decision to say no. It also came with the decision to welcome 80% of new homes, including 80% of new family-sized homes, family-sized homes within existing neighborhoods. And so the issue that you're going to run into, I'll just dig down into this a little bit. So we want to start out say, I don't know what the issue is here. Hamiltonians have already decided to meet housing need by legalizing mid-rise in existing neighborhoods. And the second point, the key point here is, well, why hasn't it happened yet? They're going to say, well, they said they were going to do that, and it never happened. And they're going to point to that statistic, which is accurate, that says, housing starts really have stalled in Hamilton. And they'll say, see, they were just lying. They're not really doing this. So it's very important to say that it's the province, not municipal foot dragging, that has been stalling the legalization of mid-rise in Hamilton. And there are a few ways that that's happened. So, firstly, it was simply by rejecting the 80% intensification target altogether for a long time. They imposed an official plan that did not include that 80% intensification target. They willingly took it out. So the whole machinery of implementing that 80% target wasn't running for the time that they had actually solved it, right? But secondly, uh, and this is what you're going to have to try to rebut, they are trying, and you want to underline that they are not succeeding. They're trying to destroy the grand bargain for density because the municipal comprehensive review process makes very explicit, right, that you get to pick. You can do this and not that. And so by doing this, you can avoid that. And so they're trying to break up that system so that it's harder for local councilors to connect their approval of development in currently low-rise neighborhoods with the mandate to stop sprawl, which is very clear. But what we want to say is, much as you're trying to do this, you want to assert that councilors really do have a mandate to accept mid-rise housing in existing neighborhoods, and that you will show up and you will fight tooth and nail to ensure that mid-rise housing does get legalized in existing neighborhoods, and not only some special kind of mid-rise housing, not only public housing, in any form. We understand that like what we're competing with here, it's not social housing in Greenfield. We're trying to find another place to put the market housing that would have gone in Greenfield. So even though you're very well known for talking about non-market housing and the problems, with the profit-based housing model, you're not going to let that be an obstacle to your saying yes to housing here, because it's certainly a hell of a lot better than Greenfield sprawl, whoever's building it. And then thirdly, that you're going to support unleashing it in the same places. So right now they're going to say, well, Hamilton only allows this mid-rise housing in these few little pockets, and maybe, on busy streets, etc. And you're going to get deputies. Well, that's not really, and I even think that, Mike is likely to say that's not really meeting the same need that we're talking about here. And then it's all rental housing. He's going to talk about ownership housing and how there's a need for ownership housing. He's saying 75% of housing needs to be ownership housing. So they're going to say, well, what's happening now is not meeting the same needs. So we don't want to assert that what's already allowed now is solving the problem, because plainly it's not. What you want to say is, listen, you've been holding us up for doing more. Let us cook, I believe, is what people slightly younger than me say. Let us cook, and get on with legalizing mid-rise. And we have a document. The good news is, like, their people they've called have all said that environmental defense, like their lead speakers, have all said that environmental defense's mid-rise manual would solve the housing shortage, right? So Mike Moffat has come out and said that. He's got a public document saying that. So you have to say, like, let's do the mid-rise manual, the environmental defense mid-rise manual. Let's do all of these things. I like wholeheartedly endorse it. And then you're basically pinning him down where he can't wiggle out of it, because he said, as long as you do that, there is no need to authorize sprawl. It would be better not to authorize sprawl. So then the final piece here, the third piece, because unfortunately, because of the way Bill 185 has restructured the sort of land use planning decision tree, it is not enough anymore to say that, well, we are choosing infill and therefore we don't need to do greenfield sprawl. We have to actually show that by allowing greenfield, we'd actually be obstructing housing overall. And so a key piece here is the proponents of this boundary expansion. They're very fond of citing Texas as an example. So when we say, like, sprawl doesn't work, sprawl makes housing expensive, they cite Texas as an example. They say, well, look, and how can you say that? Dallas and Houston and Austin, well, less so Austin, but Dallas and Houston, they basically have sprawled their way into housing affordability. So why can't we just do that? And so there are a few very clear answers to that question. Firstly, and this will be a good one to point to, note this down, as we are seeing today, the ability to sprawl yourself to affordability is entirely dependent on bottomless supplies of low bargaining power, low wage, vulnerable migrant workers, undocumented migrant workers. This is why you're seeing, small L liberal pundits, saying, "Oh, look, deporting undocumented migrant workers is going to double the cost of housing construction." Like that is the difference. That is why the difference in the price of constructing sprawl is in the undocumented migrant labor. So unless you're saying let's just have a sort of Lacanian class of workers with no rights to do all this work as a pittance, we really have to take a different approach. We have to focus on the forms of housing, laser focus on the forms of housing that produce the most homes with the same labor, equipment, and materials that we already have. We don't really have a clear path to rapidly expanding the labor force at low costs. And then secondly, so that's one. That was the labor force argument that we made the first time around. And they'll say, well, now even look, all housing starts are slowing down. So that's the second argument here. Well, why are all housing starts slowing down? It is not because of some secret cabal that has decided they want to regulate supply and they want to drive up housing costs, etc. It's very simple. The amount that people are willing and able to commit to pay for their housing is not as high as it was. And it's not as high as the cost of building the kinds of housing that these guys want to build. So nobody is going to be able to afford all of this greenfield housing. And that they're even less likely to be able to afford it now than they were before. And so it is more, and so this is, whereas, so I think the key takeaway here is mid-rise housing, if you implement the reforms that we're asking for, if you get rid of the barriers, should be a much cheaper way to build the same family size square footage of housing. And so if you want family size housing built at all, it's got to be mid-rise in existing neighborhoods. It cannot be low rise and it cannot be on greenfield because those are things that drive up the marginal per square foot, like the per square foot cost of construction, which means that you cannot build a family size units. So all of the arguments that we were making around efficiency before now also simply apply to being able to build it all. And then so yeah, so what we want to say is, hey, it's the province that's really stopping us, that has until now been stopping us from doing the things that are required to end the housing shortage. We're removing a lot of those barriers. Let us get on with it. We have workarounds. Here's the mid-rise manual. Like this is our blueprint, and everyone who showed up here to say don't sprawl are going to be here as warriors to implement these other changes too. And you can count on it. Like so and so I think that in order to win on appeal, because it looks like council is going to say no to this, thanks to all of the work that you folks have done, in order to win on the appeal, you actually will have to follow through. So you are going to have to really accelerate the timeline for legalizing mid-rise in existing neighborhoods. I would really suggest that you just cut and paste the city of Toronto's mass legalization of mid-rise on major streets in neighborhoods and just cut and paste it to every arterial or collector street. I think you have different terminology here. You don't have the major street category. Every arterial and collector, regardless of zone, should have as of right permission for 6 stories, stick frame construction, bulldoze it through all at once, no individual hearings or opportunities to like pick and choose about individual sites, a big mass shovelful of as of right approvals and say, hey, look. And then you'll be able to say, look how many units that we've already legalized ourselves. We're not waiting for individual applications. And every single shovel in the ground for greenfield development will be a shovel that's not building the stuff that we've already legalized. So you want to be able to say that. You can only say that through as of right permissions. You cannot say that if you have these things that require further rezoning applications. And that's what the City of Toronto would be able to say. And the final thing is, well, they will say, well, how come the City of Toronto isn't building vast numbers of mid-rise on these major streets? And here's the aha. Bill 185, when the provincial government introduced Bill 185, I've shared in the chat our press release on Bill 185. And we flagged a very particular provision of Bill 185 that allowed the landowners, any one of the landowners within the affected zone where housing is being permitted as of right, to stall infill development for everyone. And it is precisely because of the problem that we identified, we flagged for the government at committee regarding Bill 185, that Toronto's mid-rise development is being held up. But it's only being held up on appeal. It's only being held up because the provincial government refuses to clear that backlog. So the fact that things are moving slow, and there's a vast demand, there's a huge lineup of builders who want to build that mid-rise because they are saying, what they call 5/1. It's really the only thing that's viable to build in this market. And they will tell you that privately, when they're not in there. Oh, but they agree. They cannot be able to build anything but 5/1s for a long time. So anyway, that's where we are. I started at a kind of high level, but practically speaking, yay 5/1s. Cheers, folks.
Thanks, Phil. I don't see any questions currently in the chat, but I just wanted to, since you've been talking about it, I wanted to pull up and just kind of laser focus in again on just this argument that I certainly hear ad nauseum, as you've been saying, right? This idea of well, we need the homes, and we've got some star delegates that we know are already on the agenda talking about this. Just wanted to highlight, kind of tying it into something else that a bunch of folks on this call are familiar about, looking at renewable versus gas power, right? One of the things that people thought is that renewable energy was really going to take off as soon as it hit being super cheap. But the thing that we didn't necessarily take into account is that price isn't the same as profitability, right? The way that people can sit on gas power and dial it up and down and sell it when energy prices are really, really high is part of the reason that it's still very attractive to market forces. Whereas wind and solar you sell when the wind's blowing and the sun is shining, and you don't get to dial it up and down. Certainly, developers right now looking at the market, which all the financial folks are calling a buyer's market, would probably be more inclined to sit on some nice low tax vacant land rather than sit on some prime downtown land and wait for those conditions to turn around and turn into a seller's market again. And one of the things that I think really kind of undercuts some of these arguments, if I can share my screen just very briefly. Okay. We were talking about, taking a look at land that was underutilized in Hamilton when we first won. Some folks on this call were part of generating this map of underutilized land. And it's really curious that all that underutilized land falls in these lower price areas of housing, and these areas of urban boundary expansion that everyone seems to be laser focused on going into are all these really red, high priced areas of housing. So it's, as you're saying, sort of the exact opposite of solving that affordability crisis. Looking at the price points of homes out here over $1 million is, and up here in Mount Hope and over in Alfreda, that's what we're talking about this time.
I just also rhetorically, I don't know how folks have encountered this. There's a book that's out there. I think it's highly debated, controversial. People wonder what the agenda is behind it. The book called Abundance. I don't know how many folks are familiar with this, but people are a bit scared of the book Abundance, I think, because some of the, just deregulate everything and allow everything folks have sort of seized on it and, acted as though it endorses what they're saying. But I will point out one of the key points in that book. Uh, if you can just pull that out of your pocket when the time goes, it's abundance arises and productivity arises. It doesn't arise by just removing the barriers to doing more, making more of the same thing that you always used to make. Productivity happens, abundance happens when you change what you're building to something that you didn't even know about before. And so that's effectively what we need to do here. So, the West End home builders, they're saying, well, look, we're all used up, we need to build more of the low-rise housing that we used to build before. We need more land. Let us have more land. And we're saying, well, no, the reason that your output is low is because you're building the same kind of stuff you were building before. The only way to get more built, and you can cite the book Abundance as your endorser for that position, is to change what you were building. So that like the default for new family sized homes now is a mid-rise apartment building inside a residential street, right? So you get all the same values, you're meeting all the same needs, same number of bedrooms, same kind of quiet, low car traffic street, same kind of parks, same access to schools. You're just doing it using a different tool. And that is precisely the kind of change that, the Book Abundance endorses. That's what they talk about. So less let you if you want to sort of win over those swing people, maybe read a little bit more so they don't get you back. It is there's a lot in the zeitgeist to hold on to for us as well.
Great. Thanks, Phil. I am going to start moving it over to focusing on our Hamilton local context. I'm going to move it over to talking with Ward 2 Councillor Cameron Critch. As promised, I'm going to share some maps just so everyone gets situated on what land we are talking about. Because as you know, folks know, there's a lot of areas around Hamilton and the White Belt that were up for grabs. But taking a look just first at the city of Hamilton, if you live in the inner city, it can be really easy to forget how much of Hamilton is rural. It's a huge expanse of land, right? It's going all the way out to African Lion Safari, all the way back, taking in Binbrook over to Winona. Huge ring around the actual core of what most people who live in Hamilton think of when you say Hamilton. And the land we're talking about specifically in these two urban boundary applications are the really big parcel here, the Elfrida parcel, which I think was actually, I don't have to guess. It's right here, basically 1,200 hectares. And then the White Church Road, which was 441 hectares. So tied for the second biggest here with the 20 Road East. These are really large urban boundary expansions that are coming before council. And for folks, there's been some allusion to the fact that it's coming forward on this 9:30 a.m. June 25th meeting, and that there are some reports that exist outlining that these should be denied. So Cameron, do you want to use that as an intro to talk about what's coming up here in Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. I really appreciate that. And thanks for showing the map and showing the map that we just saw. Before I get into it, I'm Ward 2 City Councillor Cameron Critch. I represent the lower city portion right in the heart of Hamilton. It's the smallest, densest part of the city. It's also a place where there's lots of opportunity for building and for rezoning and changing. It's also the densest part of our city, and to give people a sense of kind of what the composition of the area I represent is like, 80% of the people who live in Ward 2 rent their homes. The next highest ward with a similar type of percent in the majority is in the 50s, so 53 or 54%, to give you a sense of kind of what's happening here in terms of density and how it works. And to go back to something we just spoke about a moment ago in terms of our infrastructure deficit, right? We're able to do a lot more and get a lot more bang for our infrastructure dollars in Ward 2 than we are in other parts of our city. I'll give you an example. I think it's very concrete just to kind of contextualize a little bit of those comments. Let's just say you're thinking about a place like in Ward 13, like Safari Road, right? We know there's some issues in Safari Road, so I hope it's not triggering for anybody on the call. But there aren't that many people that live on Safari Road, right? let's just say Safari Road needs to be replaced every once in a while, or infrastructure near Safari Road needs help, or some other municipal service around Safari Road needs help. How long do you think it's going to take these 6 to 10 property owners living in that stretch of road to contribute enough tax dollars to pay for the replacement of that road? The answer is never in the lifetime of the road, right? And this is a complicated situation we live in. And I'm not suggesting in a kind of polemic way that downtown is definitely paying for all these kinds of things. That's not the case. Actually, when you look at the map that shows how property taxes are distributed across the ward, across all the wards, Ward 2 is not number one. It's certainly up there, but it's not number one. But it just gives you a sense of the fact that a lot of the suburban or rural areas looking for infrastructure development, especially in areas where we've sprawled intensely, require a lot of money, a lot of infrastructure dollars. And $5.2 billion is where we're at now in terms of our infrastructure deficit. That is almost double where it was 10 years ago. So think about how that's not a sustainable situation we're in either, and how that contributes to this conversation. Before I get into it too much, though, I just wanted to kind of pick up on that thread. But before I get down the rabbit hole, just wanted to say I've been doing this work with a lot of you on this call before, and thanks for sharing that map with the little yellow patches. I helped to develop that map during the Stop Sprawl movement. And as Don will remember, we've been doing this work for a very long time. Since the downtown secondary plan revisions were coming into effect in 2016-17, and I was in those conversations, and we started something called the People's Plan for Downtown Hamilton. And it changed the downtown secondary plan for the better and did some of the very things that we're now benefiting from today. The increasing density, making things better, managing growth in a better way. And that then morphed into the People's Plan for Hamilton. We took the downtown word out and we made the People's Plan for Hamilton. And that was our first kind of roadshow go at this urban boundary issue. It was me, Don, a bunch of other people, Linda Lukasik, and we were going to libraries and community centers around and getting the chairs out and setting them up and saying to people, have you ever heard of a municipal comprehensive review? And everyone was like, no, never heard of it. And it was a kind of cross Hamilton tour. We went to rural areas, we went to the mountain, everywhere. And what we learned from that experience was people really cared about this when they started to understand past the technical language, what it meant. And then just after that, all the Stop Sprawl folks started getting organized as well, and there became a little bridge between all this, and we started sharing information, and it kind of kicked off from there. So people have already talked about that. But this has been work that's been going on in the city for a very long time, and many people have been involved in it. I just want to say that it's important to mention that, not only because it's great to know that we've won these fights, we've won these arguments, this has been good, the movement is going a certain way, but like where are we now is an important part of that story. When we first started having this conversation, we had it in a really, I want to say we were able to have it in a really basic kind of way. Look, there's this really important issue we care about. We care about our farmland. We care about a certain land. We don't want to see that land be developed. And it's gotten extremely technical. I can't even rattle off the number of bills that are involved in this or intersecting with this, and I'm not going to try over now multiple mandates for the province. And what they've done is they've wrapped everyone into this super technical, technocratic space, right? Where we're arguing not only in appeals like Phil's talking, but we're arguing in language that's absolutely inaccessible to people. And this is absolutely intentional, right? And I want to say that because I think it's really important for there to be those folks who are coming forward to delegate and share some of this technical information. But then I hope there's people who are just going to be able to come up and talk. And I don't see Mary Love on the call. Mary Love always does a great job when she delegates of just really bringing this back to the core principles of what we're after here and what the issues are here. And so there are a couple things on the agenda for this planning committee meeting on June 25th, the special meeting we're having. And they're both basically the same motion, I'll say. Technically speaking, they're not. But they're basically two motions looking at similar parcels of land in terms of the fact that some are in Ward 11 and some are in Ward 9 and 11. And when you look at all the documents, there's some repetition there. So I wanted to say to you that like that's to be expected. That's a technical place we're in. But those two chunks of land that Liv Chi pointed out in the map are what we're talking about here. And I'm grateful that staff have looked at this and taken council's lead and said, we're recommending a denial here. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that people are going to come forward with different kinds of arguments about housing, and we're not necessarily going to get a full picture. Though there is a presentation on the agenda I want to say to you from staff. I want to just grab it quickly in terms of finding where it says that there's a presentation saying how we got to the stage of urban boundary expansion applications and the June 25th public meeting. And so I'm really grateful that's there actually, because I think it's important context and that's a place where counselors can ask questions about how we ended up here. And I will say this as a counselor, not all counselors are focused on this issue. Not all counselors are paying attention to this issue. Not all counselors are on the planning committee. Not all counselors have planning knowledge and expertise. And some will be in the room to listen to these nuanced conversations about housing supply. We'll be there thinking about development charges. We'll be trying to think about this as urbanists. And some people will be there strictly to have a different kind of conversation altogether about we want to support building. We want to get more homes built. That's what we care about most. We want to have more single family homes built. And they're going to be pushing that kind of conversation. So I thought it'd be useful to just say to you out loud, even though it's not going to have a massive impact on what you do, that there's 11 people on the planning committee, right? Not all 15 of us on council. I think it's really important to say this here, and Ian's going to talk about some of it, so I won't try not to steal any of the lightning or thunder from you, Ian. But I think that we're in a different time right now in terms of the way that votes go on council because the Ward 8 seat is vacant. So 8 is the majority now. And that's that. So everyone will probably be at council when this gets ratified after the planning committee meeting, but there's only 11 people on the planning committee. So you're looking for, in that context, 6 votes. And the councillors who are on that committee are myself for Ward 2. The Ward 1 councillor, Maureen Wilson, is there. Ward 3, Narinder Nan is there. Ward 4, Councillor Huang is there. Matt Francis for Ward 5. We don't have Ward 6. We have Ward 7 there, though. And then we don't have anybody in Ward 8. We don't have Councillor Clark, but he'll probably be in attendance. He said he was going to be there. Councillor Beatty in Ward 10. Councillor Tassett in Ward 11. Councillor Kassar in Ward 12. Councillor Alex Wilson in Ward 13. And then Councillor McMeekin in Ward 15. So those are the members who said they're going to be there. I imagine all of council will probably show up if they can, right? The mayor's kind of not really around at the moment, so I'm not sure if she'll make it, but she'll be at council, I would assume. And so that's where the decision will be made. And the goal here is just to either uphold the staff recommendation or not. And I'm grateful that it's kind of that simple in a way, because this is going to get taken down a really long rabbit hole. And I think the message that's easy for everyone to communicate is we're asking you just to do what your professional staff are telling you to do, right? Deny this application. We're asking you to do what your professional staff are telling you to do. And it's good in this way because it's not an uphill climb for everybody to have to say, well, how come we're going against our staff? How are we rationalizing that? What's going on here? And it's a really 2 basic points that staff are raising for why they're saying this doesn't really make sense. So I'm just going to grab them quickly because I think it's worth just at least saying them out loud and what they mean. But they're just, number 1, this application is not consistent with the provincial planning statement and doesn't align with the general intent of the urban Hamilton official plan, right? And there's some more language there that's important, but it's really kind of basically saying, here are 2 reasons why this shouldn't happen. It goes on to say it's not been demonstrated that the development will be supported by sufficient existing or planned infrastructure and public service facilities. That is so key and important, right? What that's saying in a different way, in a very technical way, is that this is going to be sprawl. We don't have the infrastructure to support this, and it's going to cost us a fortune to do it. I think also some of the arguments that will be put forward with respect to why we need to do this, right, are going to try to address those issues, try to address the housing crisis, and try to suggest, as Phil said, that what's happening here is we're meeting the demand, we're taking this on. I also want to just say, I think, and switch the conversation a little bit to say, while this is a city decision, this is not a city decision at all. So we're here because the province has said to us, this is the kind of cute game you have to play. Technically speaking, these are the kinds of things that you have to do. We've already said what we're going to do. And there's now an official process we all have to go through, right? And this official process is what we're going through. A lot of the councillors on the planning committee have vocally supported or said that they're very supportive of, generally speaking, stopping sprawl, not expanding the urban boundary, that kind of thing. Doesn't mean there aren't going to be folks who vote in favor, vote against the staff recommendation, right? And I think we'll expect some folks to do that. I won't speculate on that now. Just so you know, as a member of the planning committee, I know I have to be thoughtful about my remarks during this webinar and thoughtful about the way I'm approaching these conversations. We all have responsibilities and obligations as members of the planning committee to be thoughtful, open, and consider these things when they're before us, especially before reports are out. Luckily, the report is out. I have the opportunity to read the report, think about it, reflect on my decision and what I'm going to do. I wouldn't expect other councillors to come with no idea of how they're going to vote at all, right? We're all required to keep an open mind in case something should happen during the meeting that might change our mind, or information might be presented that might change our mind, and we're all required to do that, and I'll be doing that. But councillors are not coming to this as a new activity or new idea. Sorry, Lucia, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was going to say, so we've covered a lot of ground, which is great. I think looping back to some of the things that that we were talking about in terms of things like the cost and other things that tend to resonate fairly well. One of the things that's kind of interesting about the Stop Sprawl fight was that there was a lot of solidarity among all different areas of Hamilton in this. People who live in rural areas, people who live in the downtown. Do you want to maybe mention? I know this is something that occasionally comes up, is that someone will say, "Well, do you live in this area?" Do you want to maybe just touch on why it does affect everyone in Hamilton and every ward of Hamilton, and it's not this sort of ward specific issue?
Yeah, so someone was saying earlier, there's a number of reasons why it's important, right? As someone was saying earlier, we're largely a rural place at this point, and frankly, a fragile ecosystem. If you look at the way that water moves through our city and look at the different watersheds and how they overlap, look at the situation we've had with sewer overflows and overflows from our CSO tanks as one example, right? And the interconnectivity of the water in this area is extremely important part of this piece of this, as far as I'm concerned. And that goes all the way out to Alpharetta, Whitechurch, beyond, right? When we start doing things like considering moving natural features, right? Or we start to impact natural features, that's going to have the current effect on everybody in our city. And as we all know, the water in the city can't take any more punishment. We already have a pretty brutal reality for those of us who want to be able to enjoy our natural water spaces and natural spaces and can't. But also from a taxation perspective, there's also that way of thinking about this, right? When we start incurring more and more deficits for taxation, we've asked provinces and federal governments for many decades now to help us, to assist us with what's happening. We're an old city like Manning, Ontario, and we're all in the same boat, and all the infrastructure is crumbling. If we don't take care of that or spend time invested in taking care of that and grow and densify in areas where it's cost effective for us to do so, our taxes are just going to go through the roof as we try to catch up, sprawl out, right? And we're hearing from people now that development charges, reductions are being planned. The province is not agreeing to make people whole. The federal government is saying things like, well, we're going to make you whole. We just haven't really figured out how we're going to do that yet. So municipalities are being put under increased pressure. Why does this matter, and who cares about development charges? Well, they fund a big part of the city's budget. When they go away, taxes have to go up to address them. That's a big piece of why that matters. Also, there's no more land being made. I know it's an old argument that gets said a lot of the time, but I think it's important. And once we pollute the land, once we build on the land, once we don't use it to a maximum effect, it's a very, very long time again before we're going to see density on that land. When you're building at a low density and you're sprawling out, it's going to be 20 to 100 years before that land is able to be used again. And that's a really ridiculous estimate I've just provided of 20 to 100 years. But the point is, like, it's often never is the answer. And I think of things like when we were designing that map of a Tim Hortons downtown. In my mind, it would be unethical to build a Tim Hortons at 1-story height in 2025 in Hamilton. Unethical. If we're going to redo the Tim Hortons because it's having a fall down, then we ought to build housing above the Tim Hortons. We ought to put retail there. We ought to do something with that space. That's the way we have to be thinking about things. That's the way that cities have to think about themselves. If we're going to continue to be part of this larger scheme the province is forcing us into, which is related to growth, right? And that's a big piece of this, and a big push and pull is the province over the last 25 years has introduced all manner of legislation being like, grow, grow, grow. And if you don't grow, we will punish you. And the Ford government has been the most handsy about that by sort of saying, well, if you don't want to do what we want to say, then we won't give you strong mayor powers, right? Like, they've been the grossest about it as far as I'm concerned. They dangled that little carrot of being like, we're not going to tell you what we're going to do, but if you don't sign on to these growth targets, then you're not going to get the prize. What's the prize? Well, we're not going to tell you what the prize is. And then the prize was strong mayor powers, which was a gross prize. But I think that why this impacts us all is because, well, first of all, we're all interconnected, as I said before. Our water was a good example of that. But I think that it's difficult for places like Hamilton to necessarily see one another when we're so big. right? It truly. And there aren't that many issues that define or captivate all of us. This is one of those. This is something we all care about. We're all conscious of. Food insecurity, right, is a big issue here. And I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that every single piece of land here is going to be used to grow food that's going to end up on your table. That would be ridiculous. But these are all very delicate ecosystems. The last thing I'll say, I see Phil's got his hand up, is that what we're seeing across the province, I'm on conservation authorities, I'm involved in things happening in other municipalities. What we're seeing happening in other places now is where we traditionally used to have this kind of divide, where there was suburban expansion and it kind of stopped, and then you'd have this breathing room, this wonderful lungs for the earth, right? That were all this green space around it. We're now seeing conservation authorities, all kinds of other people being like, you know what? We can move that wetland. No problem. We'll just recreate it over here. This is the kind of very, I think, obscure, dangerous thinking that we're going down. And I think it's important for us to hold this line, hold the urban boundary as firmly as we can. Once we start to expand, we're going to be in a bad space. Many other municipalities in Ontario, because of certain parts of the GTA holding the line, are now actually seeing the effects right this moment as sprawl is gripping them. And I mean it, like drive across Ontario, go to some municipalities where there isn't a stop sprawl movement, and see the absolutely devastating impacts that are happening to the natural environment. And you're going to see where we are. Plants heating up, and we're making these kinds of choices. We have to be more responsible.
Yeah. Phil, hop on in.
Yeah, so I just want to touch base. I agree with everything Councillor Cook said, but I will say though, in terms of we've done a lot of polling on the winnable message, and certainly on we know what's true, and I think a very straightforward thing to say is, listen, I want housing in our neighborhood. We desperately need forms of housing that we can afford. And I know that each and every home that would get built in this green development would come at the expense of a larger number of homes in my neighborhood. So I don't want this sprawl development to go ahead, because it would kneecap the housing that I do want. It would directly compete with mid-rise, stick frame, infill construction for the labor, equipment, and materials that's required to build it. And secondly, it would prevent the focused infrastructure investment required to support the densification of those existing neighborhoods. Yes, and is a nice thing to say. It's like a very convenient thing to say, but ultimately, when you're a government, you actually have to decide. When you're talking about development, you've got to decide where you're going to put things. Because if you build enough infrastructure, for 500,000 extra people in some place, and they don't show up, then that's what they call a white elephant. So you really have to pick. So if we're going to, it's because I want my kids to be able to live in my neighborhood. I want to be able to live in the same neighborhood where my parents live, and that can't happen if these developments are approved. Is a simple way to start.
Great, thanks so much, Phil. A question in the chat about looking ahead to the OLT, as people have alluded to, right? This is going to move forward to the OLT. One of the things, I know that Phil, you responded in the chat already, but one of the things that I just wanted to highlight again for folks on this call is that step one is that the city says, nah, we already talked about this. This is not our plan. Our plan is to grow it within our urban boundary. And then this moves along, because probably they will be appealed. And the point now is, yes, keeping the city to its commitments, but also Phil's strategies that he's outlining are thinking ahead to that appeal, making sure that we set things up very strongly so that the will of Hamiltonians will be reflected at the provincial level. So just kind of breaking out the two different points here. We have a municipal level fight first, and then we have a provincial level fight for this urban boundary expansions. Any other questions that people have for Phil or for Cameron? Or points, Cameron, if you'd like to make another one.
Yeah, I want to circle back. I plan to sort of end what I was going to say on this note, which was that the thing we started off here was talking about Indigenous rights, and this is National Indigenous History Month. And I really want to focus on that a little bit, because I think it's important for us to talk about the kind of violence that happens when we ask Indigenous communities for consultation. in the way that we do. I think it's worth reflecting on that as part of this process, and I'm hoping that as it goes forward to the province and they think about how they're going to interact. We've seen some of the Premier's comments recently about Indigenous folks, which are pretty shameful. But what we're doing is, if you don't know this, oftentimes when you're asking someone for consultation, it's called a circulation, right? Sounds like a blood issue inside your heart. It's not. It's, this process by which we have this really defined area outside of something, and then physical letters written in a language that can only be deciphered by linguists are sent out en masse to people in a meaningless fashion. The same type of thing happens for Indigenous communities with a little bit more care, but not enough as far as I'm concerned. We are asking routinely Indigenous communities to consult on a ton of stuff with absolutely no support, absolutely no meaningful ways of doing so in ways that make sense for Indigenous communities based on the way that they want to be consulted, based on the kind of conversations they want to have, based on the things that are important to them. We're continuing to use this colonial tool as a method for trying to get that consultation. And so what happens a lot, and what we hear back sometimes, and I've heard this recently at a council meeting, was Indigenous communities say, okay, like they're not saying they agree, they're saying like whatever, kind of like whatever to this strange document. And then we're asking people to be doing this kind of thing. And there are lots of lawyers who are working in different Indigenous communities who are planners and other kinds of things who have this expertise. So it's out there. It's just that the kind of consultation we're doing is really a bureaucratic. And so I think all of this is caught in that bureaucracy. All of us are caught up in this conversation in that way. I'm grateful for the folks in environmental defense, everybody else who are thinking ahead to the next step, right? What is the next step going to be when council says no, and there's going to be an appeal we face and so on and so forth. It's out of our hands. I'm hopeful that we're going to come together as a council, as many of us as possible, and stick with the staff recommendation here and to deny these expansions. If you're looking for ways to contact people, I know Ian's going to talk about that next, but I just want to say thank you very much for having me here. Happy to answer any questions you have. I'm grateful for, honestly, the tireless work of everyone on this phone call and everyone else who's kept this movement going. It's so vitally important that we take care of what happens next.
Yeah, thanks. I was talking with some folks here at our Art Crawl Eco Hub, and one of the things that I heard recently was at an event where Naomi Klein was speaking, and she was just hitting home this point that they're banking on our exhaustion, right? They being, whether it's fossil fuels, developers, whoever, right? Like they're companies. People go to work for a 9 to 5, and that institution will keep on rolling and keep trying again and again. And we are just people. We have lives. We get tired. And so they are literally banking. They're taking out loans and they're banking that we are going to get tired and that they are going to win. And so, keeping that in mind, we've done is really, frankly, tremendous. And, we just gotta keep holding the line, as folks have been saying. So last chance for questions before we get to some practical steps from Ian. Anyone going once, going twice? No? Well, thank you so much. Phil Pothman from Environmental Defense and Cameron Critch, Councillor for Ward 2. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. And Ian Borsick, Director of Environment Hamilton, and familiar face to probably everyone here. Do you want to tell us what we can do?
Yeah, so Lucia already showed us the agenda for next week's meeting. You briefly showed us the calendar. So again, this is coming up as Cameron laid out and as Phil laid out as well. It's coming to the Planning Committee meeting on June 25th next week. So Wednesday next week. The meeting starts at 9:30. And what I'm here to do is to ask all 44 folks still remaining on this call, as well as anyone who's watching the recording after the fact who couldn't attend live, to please register to delegate. I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to delegate on the 25th and I haven't registered yet. So I'm going to show you all how I'm going to register, and that will take us through the steps. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. And so here is the Planning Committee agenda, which we saw briefly before this. As we can already see, we have some registered delegations. I do want to point out, and I know Councillor Kretsch is a fan of procedure. I do just want to point out that technically speaking, there are two separate items on the agenda, items 8.1 and 8.2 for the two separate urban boundary expansion proposals. However, it does appear Clerks has made the decision to lump any delegations about either of these expansions into various delegations respecting urban boundary expansion. So if it, you can try, I certainly, if you're tenacious and you want to argue to clerks that you want to make a specific and different delegation about each of these proposals, I absolutely encourage you to do so. However, I am just going to say it looks like the trend has been set by clerks, and it's hard to sometimes upend that trend after it's already been set. So what you're going to do to register to delegate is you're just going to go to Google or whatever search engine you use, and you're going to type in Hamilton Council Delegate. This is the easiest way of finding it. Usually, in most search engines, it's going to pop up with request to speak to a committee of council. As you can see, I've clicked on that link many a time before, and it's going to take you to the request to speak to a committee of council page. It'll show you some information here. Because this is a standing committee, specifically planning committee, you can find some extra information here, and it'll tell you how to submit written submissions, pre-recorded submissions if you can't make it, as well as oral submissions live. I think the best way to put it is live oral submissions in person is very impactful. Live oral submissions via, WebEx or their live stream app is second best. A pre-recorded video can be really impactful. I've seen them really be effective. And then you can also submit a written delegation. The reason why I am perhaps belittling written delegations is because you don't take up time during the meeting with a written delegation. It's just added to the planning committee agenda, and you can't guarantee if anyone has read them, really, at the end of the day. So if you want to absolutely guarantee that counselors listen to what you have to say, prepare a 5-minute presentation either by video or more ideally for a live presentation. You don't have to use up all the 5 minutes, and I'll go into a little bit more details about what to delegate on a little bit after. But because this is a planning committee meeting, you're just going to select planning committee. I'm going to be delegating in person, and I'm not going to be delegating by a pre-recorded video. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to type in my name. I'm going to be delegating on behalf of Environment Hamilton. And I'm going to be typing in my email there. And I'm actually just going to do some quick little fill in. And then I'm just going to change this to our actual address. So as you can see, I'm just going to change that. It's really important to note I'm showing everyone my personal information here. This is the address of the Environment Hamilton office. All of this information, your email, your phone, your address, will be redacted for the public agenda. So as you can see here, we can see who are registered here. If you click on this, you'll be able to see some more information there. None of that information that identifies you or can locate you will be published publicly. It's not mandatory, but you can ask for your preferred pronoun, and then you can type in your reason for delegation request. For me, I'm going to be saying I wish to speak on items 8.1 and 8.2 of the June 25th Planning Committee meeting. You can provide more information there if you'd like, but clerks will know. If you're saying, I want to speak at the Planning Committee on June 25th, and you mention urban boundary expansion at some point in this reason for delegation request, they will figure it out and they'll add you to the agenda. If they're confused about that, they'll follow up with you. Clerks are very good about following up and ensuring that they understand what your request is. None of us are going to be requesting funds from the city, and you can submit a formal presentation. This is where you have to submit it to clerks in advance. I'm not going to be submitting a formal presentation, but you certainly can as well. And then you're just going to scroll down past all this information, and you're going to click submit. And then I'll receive an email from clerks saying, "Hey, thanks for for your delegation request. You have been received." Then after that, most likely because I just submitted the request now, maybe at some point tomorrow, but most likely on Monday, if depending on how many requests are sent in, the clerk themselves will email me. They'll say, "Hey, Ian, thank you so much for the delegation request. Just so you know, you've been added as a delegation request to the agenda." Procedurally, all delegation requests, unless they've been submitted far in advance and there's already been a meeting where the committee has approved it, have to be approved at that committee meeting. It's just a procedural process. Councillor Kretsch, you can certainly speak to this, but essentially, at the beginning of the meeting, whoever's chairing the meeting says, "Do we approve the delegation requests?" Everyone says yes. In all my years of doing delegations, I've never seen a delegation request denied by a council committee. When you get to the city hall, or if you're joining up on WebEx, I think, Councillor Cratch, Phil, you guys both provided a lot of information, a lot of really great arguments. But it's really important to note, and this is just from my personal experience, you only have 5 minutes. You are one person in the city of Hamilton. Speak from the heart. Speak about what you feel comfortable speaking about. Speak about the arguments that you feel are compelling to you. Definitely touch on, the same points that we've been talking about. I think, Phil, you've definitely named a few pieces that are really important. But if there's one specific piece, like, for example, I think, for a lot of folks on council, the piece of, I want to be able to have my children live in the same neighborhood as me one day. If that's what's speaking to you, really talk about that. Tell the story about why this is important to you. Counselors, if you're there in person, they will make eye contact with you. They will maybe smile. Maybe they might frown, but just ultimately stay calm. If you find that one of the counselors is maybe making good eye contact and they're not giving you any uncomfortable vibe or anything like that, look at Counselor Kretsch maybe, and just give your delegation there. I really recommend ensuring that you stick around to 5 minutes. You don't want to go over because you will be cut off. Because most likely there's going to be a number of delegates, the chances of the chair giving extra time after the fact is maybe not as likely, because once that precedent kind of gets set, they have to do it for everyone else. Really important to note that within those 5 minutes, you just stay calm, you give your case, and then after that, you might receive questions from the counselors. Depending on how many delegates we have, there's slight chance that none of us will get any questions. Maybe there's a slight chance all of us will get questions. I don't know. Really important to note, if you're someone like me or you're Phil, or, I would say I would even put Lucia in this category as well. You might get a question and you might feel the need to answer it. For someone like me or Phil, we're paid to do this type of work. If you don't feel comfortable answering a question, if you don't know the answer to that question, it's perfectly okay to say you don't know the answer to that question. In fact, it's even better to say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question. I don't know. I think another delegate might be able to speak to this. That's completely fine. You're not there to be grilled. You're just there as an individual citizen of the city of Hamilton to provide feedback to council and tell them how they can do their job better, essentially, at the end of the day. And as long as you keep that attitude during your delegation, and as long as you remember that you'll be able to either, turn off your camera afterwards or leave the podium and go join the rest of us in the gallery, you'll get through it totally fine. For anyone who's new to this, or if you need some extra help, I'm going to share my email in the chat. It's just my first initial, my last name at environmenthamilton.org. I'm happy to help anyone review your notes, anything like that. If you'd like to pre-record a video delegation and you're not sure how to do that, we at Environment Hamilton have helped folks record delegations as well. So if you really want to do a delegation, but you can't make it there in person and you want to do a pre-recorded video, just send me an email, and over the weekend or before Wednesday, before the deadline of Tuesday, the noon at Tuesday beforehand, we can ensure that that gets recorded and will be submitted to the clerks. So again, I'll share my email in the chat, but I'm more than happy to help you and with anyone who might need help with delegations or setting things up. But otherwise, I think I'll just hand it back to Lucia from there.
I was saying, thanks, Ian, for the really thorough how-to on delegating. It's something for people who haven't done it yet, or maybe it's like your second or third time, it can still be really nerve-wracking. So thanks for all the tips and all the how-tos. But I just wanted to say, maybe a little bit facetiously here, but Ian, people are going in with their minds made up. What can I do to talk to my counselor before the meeting if I can't delegate? What could I possibly do?
So I know it's been shared in the chat, and if you go to ssho.ca, the Stop Sprawl Ham on website, you can find a really quick link and a list of all of our counselors and their emails that can be reached there. If you have the time, I also recommend maybe checking it out and calling their office and leaving a message, or leaving a message with the staff or who answers the phone there. And then I think it is also worth noting, to the point of folks coming in with their mind made up. If you are delegating, if you are emailing your counselor beforehand, back when the first big urban boundary fight happened, there were councillors who were in favor of the urban boundary expansion. And those folks are no longer councillors. Some of them didn't run for re-election, but some of them did. And I really just want to say that if you think your councillor is going to vote the wrong way on this, or you just want to let them know that this is going to be an election issue for you in 2026. Let them know that this is what you're going to talk to your neighbors and your friends and your fellow ward residents about, and that you know that people who are passionate about preserving our urban boundary, about densifying neighborhoods, building the housing we actually need, do organize and do vote. And that has been exemplified in Hamilton at the municipal level. Now we can say, oh, Doug Ford's won a third mandate or anything like that. It does not matter. Councillors have lost their jobs over how they voted on urban boundary expansion. So if you feel comfortable making that argument, definitely recommend you do so.
Well, on the topic of talking to friends and neighbors, thanks, Ian. I think we're going to pass it off. Finally, I just wanted to talk with Martha. Martha, if you guys have been to like a Greenbelt rally, you've met Martha. And I just wanted to talk about, feeling like, what can we do? Can community actually organize? Can we change things? Is this a done deal?
Well, I can't believe we're here again having to do this all over. It's like Stop Sprawl Part 2. But it is very important to believe that as an individual, we can do something, that one person can get out there and make a difference. I went to so many protests, wrote so many emails, mailed postcards, signed petitions, and sometimes it just felt frustrating and like it wasn't getting anywhere. But in the end, it made a huge difference. And I think there's a book called The Politics of Nonviolent Action, and it's 198 methods. And I think anybody can come up with 198 methods. It's coming up with 198 people. So it's so really very important to talk to all your friends and your family and find something that means something to them, whether it's talking about their basements flooding, or that they may not have a place to go hiking or birding, or that there's going to be more mosquitoes in their backyard because there's no wetlands and birds. You have to find what is important to them. Maybe it's just washing your driveway or washing your car, because when they take away our wetlands, we're not going to have water. We're not going to have clean water. And if we do, it's going to cost us a fortune. So a few of the things that I have done is, well, I'm kind of texting Doug Ford every day, and I make postcards out of recycled cardboard and mail them. And from what I've read, for all the petitions that we sign and email in, the most important thing still is snail mail, because anybody can scroll by an email or glance at it and not really read it. But if there's a stack of paper or postcards on their desk, they're going to see that, and it's going to make more of an impact. So even if you have to print off all those petitions and print off 10 and hand one to each of your neighbors or your friends and ask them to print off 10 and pass it along, and always in a petition, fill in that little box that says, do you have an extra comment? Put something in there, because then they have to read it. One of the things that we did during Stop Sprawl that worked really great was just to get like 8 people. Everybody has a poster. You go to an intersection, you have one person at each corner, and I printed off flyers at the library. $20 got me 200 flyers, and at the red light, just hand them through the windows, just information flyers, because it's amazing how many people don't know what's going on. And I don't know how we get to them. It's on every social media. I mean, I post all over Facebook, but for some reason, if anybody's got a good way. And the other group that we're not getting to is students. And so if you've got a contact in Mohawk College or McMaster University, that you can get it on their billboards or something. We need to get there, because those kids aren't hearing about this. So I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I think it's just to get out there and do what you can. I mean, Doug won with a 47%, which is not really a mandate. So he needs to be told, the counselors need to be told. So as everybody said, make your phone calls, write your letters to the editor. I do that too.
Yeah,
And
Martha, I
sign those
think that
petitions.
one of the things I just want to highlight here is that, just in closing, you're like snail mail, for, petitions, all these things like, aren't we done with that, right? Didn't we do it? Like you said, this feeling of like, really, again? Unfortunately, because of the way Bill 185 works, yes, everybody, we're going to have to do this again, probably. Right. Like,
Yep.
I hope that we will send a very strong, definitive message. But probably someone somewhere is going to go, where we could make a quick buck buying up some cheap farmland outside of Hamilton. Like someone's going to have this idea again. And as long as Bill 185 is there, we're going to have to fight it again. But hopefully, with each victory, it is going to get easier and easier and easier, to just hold the line, as people have said, and say, no, we can't sprawl forever. It's not good for us, not good for the planet, not good for our pocketbooks, not good for anything.
Yes.
Dawn.
Yep.
I just want to add something very small. Thank you, all the speakers and all the contributions here. A basic reality is that this was all supposed to happen 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We stopped it. So 5 years of protecting our farmland, 5 years of more food, 5 years of more frogs, 5 years of more clean water, and so on. That's worth it alone. And we may have to fight this another time yet, but every time we win, we do accomplish something. It's not, we shouldn't frame it in the form of, oh no, we got to fight it again. Well, that's part of living. And thanks so much, Martha, and others who've worked so hard on this.
Great. Thanks, Dawn. Good words to live by there. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap everything up. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And thanks to our speakers and thanks to our organizers. Any last minute plugs before people hop off the call? Any upcoming events or things that people want to advertise?
If I may, had a request from Bay Area Climate Change Council. If you are an equity deserving resident and you're interested in participating in a workshop where you will be compensated, and this is about climate change locally in the city of Hamilton, I'm going to be sharing a link in the chat, or if you know anyone who this might apply to, definitely please share that around. And then also, Environment Hamilton will be at Open Streets this coming Sunday at the Wellington Hub near our friends like Acorn Hamilton and some others. I don't know how long we'll be there because it's supposed to be very hot, but we will be there in the morning. I'm almost entirely sure, unless we hit 34 before noon. But I look forward to seeing folks out there, and we'll also be talking about sprawl with folks at that event too.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, this is a little bit off topic, but this crowd, I hope there are some people that would be interested in this. Many of us know about Bill 5, and many of us are also activists and would like to be involved in things. And I just want you to keep your eyes open for an opportunity, which I hope will actually be developed. And I heard about this on a recent meeting that Phil was at, and some others perhaps in the crowd, but there's an idea to pretend that Queen's Park is an area of economic interest, and we'll get as many people out to do things like put up paper mache oil derricks and various other things. We'll litter that front lawn with development, and just to make a statement. And so I'm hoping you'll keep your ears open and join in if you can. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, definitely strong opposition to Bill 5 for everyone here. I think I can say that confidently. All right. Well, great. Thanks, everyone, for spending your evening with us. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot of us on June 25th.